Welcome back to the Remdesivir Files, a COVID-19 chronicle. I'm your host Sowmya, and today we are going global, not in the geopolitical sense, but in the technical, logistical labyrinth that is worldwide pharmaceutical distribution. In episode 7, Global Distribution, a clinical logistics challenge, we unpack what it takes us to move a high-stakes, temperature-sensitive, urgently needed drug like remdesivir across continents, time zones, and regulatory boundaries without compromising safety, stability, or supply continuity. Joining us today is Saakshi Sharma.
Thank you. Thrilled to be here. It's a topic I think a lot more people are curious about now, especially after seeing how critical distribution logistics became during the pandemic.
Let's dive in from the logistics heart, the cold chain. Why does remdesivir require cold chain management? And what are the scientific and technical stakes involved in maintaining it?
Great question. Remdesivir, especially in its IV lyophilized and solution forms, has specific temperature stability profiles. Lyophilized powder requires storage at refrigerated temperature, typically 2 degrees Celsius to 8 degrees Celsius, to maintain chemical integrity over its shelf life. Even brief excursions outside this range, especially in high heat climates, can lead to degradation of the active pharmaceutical ingredient or API, rendering it less effective or even unsafe. Now, maintaining a cold chain sounds simple until you realize that it extends from the manufacturing facility to airport storage, to international cargo flights, to custom clearance facilities, to hospital pharmacies. At every point, the temperature must be monitored and logged. That involves specialized refrigerated containers, thermal mapping, data loggers, and contingency planning for power outages, custom delays, or breakdowns in remote areas. Cold chain logistics becomes even more complex in regions without consistent infrastructure, say parts of sub-Saharan Africa or interior Southeast Asia, where backup refrigeration system and passive cooling may be needed. And all this must happen at speed because demand cannot wait.
So, let's talk about forecasting demand. During a rapidly evolving pandemic, how do manufacturers and distributors estimate how much of the drug is needed and where?
This is where data science meets public health. Forecasting demand for a therapeutic like remdesivir isn't static. It's deeply tied to epidemiological modeling. You need to look at infection rates, hospitalization data, ICU occupancy, and treatment guidelines that differ by country or even by hospital. Typically, manufacturers work closely with health ministries, the WHO, and public-private consortia to receive ongoing projections. But these are forecasts, not guarantees. One wave can overwhelm a region while another fades. You might need 10,000 vials in one city in April and none in May. So you build dynamic inventory systems and regional hubs that can respond to these fluctuations. Add to that the complexity of batch production cycle. It can take weeks to manufacture and release new stock, and you quickly realize how critical, accurate, near real-time forecasting becomes. Overproduction leads to wastage, underproduction leads to stockouts in critical care settings. It's a balancing act on a global stage.
Distribution isn't just about delivery, it's about permission. What does the regulatory landscape look like when you're trying to ship a drug like remdesivir to over 100 countries?
You have hit on one of the biggest logistical bottlenecks, which is regulatory filings. Every sovereign nation has its own drug regulatory authority, and each has its own requirement for importing, storing, and administering pharmaceutical products. For remdesivir, even under emergency use authorization or EUA provisions, there were dozens of parallel filings, not just for the finished drug, but for the active pharmaceutical ingredient or API, for excipients, for container closure system, and for stability data. Some countries require local clinical data, others accept bridging studies, and a few accept WHO pre-qualification, but that's never guaranteed. Additionally, a batch tested and released in the US may need retesting under another country's pharmacopoeia standards before it can be used. That means Maintaining a tight global regulatory database and having compliance teams that can work across jurisdictions, often in multiple languages, under intense time pressure. It's a silent race, not to the market, but to the legal readiness in each target geography.
Let's get a bit technical. What are the unique challenges in shipping APIs safely and in bulk? What kind of precautions or preparations are needed?
Shipping APIs, especially ones as chemically sensitive as remdesivirs, is a science and art combined. First, the API must be stabilized for long distance travel. This involves packaging it in moisture-proof, light-resistant, and temperature-stable containers, usually double or triple sealed drums with inert gas fills. Second, APIs often fall under hazardous material categories during shipping, depending on their chemical properties. That means complying with IATA regulations for air transport, UN coding systems for labeling, and extensive documentation regarding toxicology, fire risk, and environmental hazards. And let's not forget traceability. Each shipment must be logged with batch numbers, origin destination certificates, chain of custody records, and contamination risk assessments. In emergencies, these regulations aren't waived. If anything, they become more rigorously enforced because you are sending unformulated pharmaceutical ingredients, not consumer ready drugs. Also, some countries restrict the import of APIs unless they are being manufactured or packaged locally, which adds a layer of diplomatic and legal complexity.
So finally, if you had to summarize, what does remdesivir's global distribution teach us about future pandemic readiness from a logistics point of view?
What we learned is that scientific readiness alone isn't enough. You can have an effective molecule, proven trials, regulatory approval, but if your distribution network isn't pandemic proof, patients won't benefit. Remdesivir forced the industry to look at resilience in logistics, distributed cold chain capabilities, global regulatory harmonization, flexible warehousing, and digital inventory systems. One of the biggest wins was the rise of public-private logistics partnerships. Think of vaccine distribution frameworks applied to small molecule therapeutics. For the future, we need pre-validated logistics corridor, adaptable packaging system, and regulatory sandboxing mechanisms that allow faster in-crisis coordination. Pharmaceutical logistics can no longer be an afterthought. It is fundamentally the bridge between bench science and beside impact.
That's an incredibly insightful perspective. Saakshi, thank you so much for joining us and walking us through the complexity and importance of pharmaceutical logistics in real time.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being a part of this important series.
You've been listening to the Remdesivir Files, a COVID-19 Chronicle. In our next episode, we'll step into the formulation challenges of the drug. Stay tuned. Until then, stay safe, stay thoughtful, and stay curious.